live. All right, so we're going to see the room fill up here in a minute. And I'm going to ask people where they're joining from. I see the first attendee. Awesome, great. Hi, welcome. Welcome. If this is your first time, welcome to the Hive Think Tank. We're so happy to be partnering with the Hive Southeast Asia. And if you're a returning data bee, thanks for coming back. Awesome. I can see there's a bunch of people starting to come into the room. Where's everyone joining us from? I know that we have a lot of people from around the world, so I would love to see where you're joining from. You can drop your location in the chat if you feel comfortable. I'm in the Bay Area, California. Okay, awesome. So we're definitely filling up here. We're going to get started here in a minute. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Maddie Watt. I lead the Hive Think Tank, which is based out of Palo Alto. And we have an incredible panel for you guys today. I'm so excited that you're here to listen to this amazing panel of speakers talk all about corporate co-creation. And this session is going to be recorded. So if you have a colleague that wasn't able to join or you have to hop off early, that's okay. You're going to automatically get the recording sent to you tomorrow. And I just want to remind everyone, we love when you guys ask questions. We want to give these speakers a run for their money. So I hope you have your best questions ready to go for them. And to ask a question, all I want you guys to do is please use the Q&A button. If you look at the bottom of your screen below all of our videos, you should see a few buttons over there, and there's one that says Q&A. So if you can just please ask your question in there, that makes it really nice and easy for our moderator, TM Ravi, to be able to see the questions in one place. You guys can upvote the questions that you want to see answered the most, so those will trend towards the top. And I don't want your questions to get lost in the chat. So if I see you asking a question in the chat, I'm going to have to chase you down and ask you to use the Q&A button. So please just remember to use that. Okay, so let me just quickly tell you about what the Hive Think Tank does and all of our upcoming events before I pass the mic over to Haizam, who is going to tell you a little bit about the Hive Southeast Asia. Thank you, Ravi. Awesome. So what is the Hive Think Tank? The Hive Think Tank is an ecosystem of corporations, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs. We are hosting events sometimes every other week. Right now, every week. We actually just had 2 last week, and I'll go ahead and drop our YouTube channel in the chat so you guys can see what we've been up to. And we're just really excited to be able to bring you this session tonight that's going to be focused again on corporate co-creation and innovation and how to best think of innovation in these new ways. Thanks, Ravi, for the next one. And a special thanks to our sponsors. If you want to find out more about sponsorship, I will go ahead and drop a link with my email in the chat so you guys can reach out to me. And then let me tell you about some of the events we have coming up. I'm going to try to keep this very brief. So we've got an incredible, amazing keynote with Dr. Satyam Priyadarshi on the energy industry and how digital transformation is actually changing that and allowing it to become more sustainable. So that's going to be very exciting. And that's going to be, these are based on California time. So this will be on Thursday, the 15th. And I know a lot of you guys are joining from around the world. So go ahead and register for it anyways, because then you can get the link sent to you automatically if you don't want to be up in the middle of the night. But if you're a night owl, that's okay too. Great. Next one, Ravi. Thank you. And then we have another sustainability event the following week on investing in a sustainable energy future. There's going to be a huge panel, very interesting. These are a bunch of different investors who are focused on the energy space, and they are now leading the pack in terms of how the energy space is going to become more sustainable through investment. And then next, thank you so much, Ravi. We're starting a really awesome track that's going to be about once a quarter. We're going to be holding an AI reading club. And this is going to be a panel of some of the latest and greatest, people in this space in terms of ML, AI, and they're picking the most recent and also the most relevant AI publications, and they're going to be talking about them in depth, and we are going to be posting the links for those publications and literature so that you guys can read ahead and then join in on the conversation like a real book club. All right, and then I think we have one more. Perfect, thanks, Ravi. And then we're going to be doing an event on computer vision with our sponsor, TIBCO. And this is going to be focused on how computer vision is changing and revolutionizing the industrial sector. So I will drop links for all of these things into our chat so that way you can sign up for them. And without further ado, here is TM Ravi and also Haizam. Ravi, Haizam, whoever wants to go first, please go ahead.
Maybe I'll start first, and I'll hand it over to Haizam and then take it.
Hand it back to you. Perfect. That makes sense.
So thank you, Maddie. My name is TM Ravi. I'm the managing director and co-founder of The Hive. And so The Hive is a venture capital entity based in Palo Alto, California. And I'm today with Matty in Palo Alto. And so it is a particular segment or a subset of venture capital, subsegment, if you may, which is called a venture studio. And our focus is on leveraging data, AI, and deep tech to drive transformation, drive sustainability across a range of industries that I've listed here. Um, uh, the venture studio approach is an approach which is complementary to incubators, accelerators, traditional venture capital, growth capital, PE, and the key sort of unique aspect of venture studios is that we tend to be, in addition to investing in companies, we tend to be very operationally involved in companies, especially in the early stages, the first year and a half. In addition to our presence here in the US, we have separate entities to foster innovation in local regions, in Sao Paulo for Brazil, Bangalore for India, KL for the Hive Southeast Asia, and soon I'll be introducing my colleague to talk a little bit about the Hive Southeast Asia. And later this year, we are collaborating with some partners in Saudi Arabia to create the Hive MENA, and next year, the Hive Europe. And so if you're an entrepreneur and are interested in connecting with our teams anywhere in the world, please reach out to Matty, and she's going to share her email address. With that, I'd like to just hand it off to my colleague, Haizam of the Hive Southeast Asia, just say a few words before we start the event.
Morning, everyone in Southeast Asia, and also evening to everyone in the US. I'd like to thank Ravi and all our distinguished speakers today for being a part of. This is our fourth Hive Think Tank event, and specifically, it's with regards to co-creation. The Hive Southeast Asia is a co-creation and seed fund. We received a mandate from the Malaysian government, Ministry of Finance, through the Dana Penjana National Program, which was part of the Penjana Economic Recovery. Really, the rhetoric for us is digitalizing Malaysia and Southeast Asia into economic recovery and thus into the fourth industrial revolution. As you can see, as Ravi has summarized, we are the fourth entity in the group of Hive companies around the world. The Hive in the US co-created 30 different companies, more than 30 companies. Hive Brazil co-created a lot of different companies with it and invested into early stage companies in the fintech space, ultimately building the first digital bank in Brazil, which is very exciting from us. So we will really benefit from the Hive's expertise in deep ecosystems relationships and the global collaboration for innovation and greater value creation, right? Just quickly, really excited about the three panelists today. Dato Sri Shazalli, of course, at the forefront of co-creation, we will want to work with likewise individuals who will drive innovation in the corporate sector. Dr. Wong, representing the Securities Commission, we're really excited because we know that the Securities Commission is excited and driving innovation in the private sector, in the corporate sector. And last but not least, Peter, who leads BCG Digital Ventures, and they have been at the forefront of numerous companies at the forefront of digitalizing Southeast Asia. Yeah, so just to summarize, the Hive Southeast Asia, where now we are co-creation and seed fund. We just had our first investment committee, and we will be investing into early stage companies and co-creating companies to digitalize Malaysia and Southeast Asia. Thank you. Pass it back to Ravi.
Thank you, Haizam. So just for the audience, if you're going to post something on Twitter, please use the hashtag HiveData, and please do ask questions towards the later part of the event. I'll bring up some of your questions. So let me just hand it over to the panelists, and Haizam, thanks for briefly introducing them. So maybe Dato Sri Shazalli, we can just start with you and just say a few words about yourself, and especially kind of, you have a distinguished kind of career and a kind of track record of innovation within both larger corporation and smaller entities. Maybe I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and after that, Dr. Wong and Peter. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ravi, and thank you all. First and foremost, thank you for allowing me to be among the distinguished panel this morning or this evening, depending wherever you are. But just a quick, brief introduction of myself. Yes, I have been in the industry for a while now. I've reached a point that I'm starting again. So I'm basically a new startup at the point where you have done all the brick and mortars. So it's a very interesting journey. I've gone through FMCG half of my life, broadcasting and telecommunications, and subsequently now running a very heavily diversified company on a turnaround program, and hopefully, being able to embrace some of the topics that we are discussing today to create change or new future for companies that have been established for over 193 years. So something to explore during the next hour. Thanks.
And an interesting challenge, because you have a wide portfolio ranging from petrol bunks to ships, and driving kind of innovation there must be exciting.
Yes, I think this particular role that I'm doing now it's a very, I call it the perfect one to start, because it has a legacy of history, very diversified, multitude of challenges with respect to the commercial perspective, and even the reason for being in that sense, and then it has also a sizable. If you talk to the startup boys, that is a sizable playroom. You have the scale of plantations. You're talking sustainability with digitizations. You talk about defense industry. You can float into vaccination and pandemic at the moment, because we're right in the center of it at the moment. And the other extreme, we have hotels and resorts. So you can see the dynamic is a very interesting portfolio of projects, and depend. If we take the argument that you want to do everything in-house and fix this place in one go, that's almost an impossible feat. So I think the theme of today, co-creation and ecosystem development and terminologies of collaborations, you can hear that more often in the context of today's agenda, are essentially the solution for tomorrow. So I hope I can share that bit later. Thanks.
Dr. Wong, you are sort of in a key position with the Securities Commission in enabling this ecosystem that Dato Shazalli talked about. Please introduce yourself.
Hi. I'm Huei Ching, call me Huei Ching. I lead the strategy function at the SC, yes. As I was thinking this morning how to introduce myself, I thought there's no way I can make my job sound interesting to a VC-centric community. but like in short, so in my role here, we work a lot with market participants, including the VC ecosystem, to shape the direction of the capital market, and then in turn look at how SC as an organization can actually help enable them. Right? So that's a short of what we do. Personally, I have been on various sides of the coins before. I have been on the consultant side before, and I've been on the corporate side before. And experience on the regulator side really does nicely tie things together, and giving you perspective of how corporates work, what do we need to do in terms of transformation, and now from a regulator perspective, what's needed within the ecosystem at the macro level. So yeah.
Thank you. Peter, you are helping CEOs in the region transform their companies. And so tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do as part of BCG Digital Ventures.
Sure. Thanks so much, TM. And thanks so much to my fellow panelists and everyone for joining. I'm Peter Cho. I'm a managing director and partner, and I lead our business across Southeast Asia for BCG Digital Ventures. And BCG Digital Ventures, a little bit different than what you guys might be familiar with on BCG. Our mission is to invent, launch, and scale industry-changing businesses together with the most influential corporations in the world. And I'd say the second half of that sentence is way more important than the first. The first everyone wants to do. I think the second is what makes us a bit distinctive, together with the most influential corporations, because we believe that for a long time, big companies have had tremendous assets. They just haven't been able to work out how to use them effectively to create path-breaking new businesses. And we have a belief that, of course, the startup ecosystem and tech and VC have a lot to say about the future of our world and how we live in it. But at the same time, big companies, if they can work out how to work out and use their assets, can also be a part of that story and be a part of creating path-breaking innovation going forward. And of course, there's that innovation imperative, and every company has to do so. Transform or die. And we at BCG DV, we're one of the largest corporate venture builders in the world. More than 1,000 employees. We've launched now, I think, 180 ventures since our founding. And those are ventures that we've launched during the period in which we've been incorporated, not the collective sum of all the ventures that we bring. In fact, we bring a different type of people. We bring, product managers, engineers, user experience designers, and the like. Personally, here in Southeast Asia, we've set up camp, and we've had the opportunity to build a number of interesting vendors across fintech, ed tech, health tech, sustainability and green, agriculture. And so, very excited to be here and to learn a bit from my, fellow panelists as we have this discussion here today.
There's just an amazing growth opportunity for Southeast Asia, and a kind of and a leapfrogging kind of opportunity, because you don't have a lot of technical debt and legacy and so forth. As you think about kind of innovation in Southeast Asia, Peter, you focused on sort of corporations and enabling kind of the assets that are perhaps underutilized in corporations. Innovation is hard in sort of major significant innovation is hard in corporations. And it's easy for 5 people in a room in a startup to kind of innovate. What in your experience, and if you are able to give us examples, what has kind of worked in terms of doing kind of significant kind of transformation, or significant as opposed to incremental transformation in corporations?
Sure, I think the reality is, I think you said it's relatively easy for 5 people in a garage. I think the reality is it's hard everywhere and different types of challenges. But, I'd venture a guess to say that corporate innovation and corporate venturing, it is quite challenging in its own ways. There are probably good reasons and bad reasons, or understandable reasons, and then reasons that we understand but maybe shouldn't accept. And the understandable reasons can be perhaps a lack of the right capabilities, perhaps a governance model and decision-making bureaucracy that was set up to manage an existing business, or maybe a CapEx-heavy business. And these things are all good, and they should be in place in the context of how you might work on a day-to-day basis, but may or may not be appropriate in the context of how you'd actually do that in the context of corporate venturing. And then there are the bad reasons, or the ones that we understand but maybe shouldn't accept. Some of these questions around how do you manage the corporate silos and different interests across the organization. And then there are the ones in between that are very challenging. Some of the questions around, many companies are dealing with how do you manage the threat of cannibalization? When you have an existing, strong, profitable business and you start talking about creating these other businesses that might in the short term be dilutive. And how do you bring all that together to actually get stuff done? Certainly, TM, you asked about some of the challenges. The challenges are long, but we believe that these are not insurmountable. We think that there's a new formula that allows you to actually be successful if you can work out how to unlock those assets of the corporation to be able to spark the next wave of innovation from a corporate venturing perspective.
And if I may just, Peter, you've been helping a number of CEOs and corporations. So just is there a sort of an approach that you've used to to sort of enable corporations to do it, to kind of just think outside the box and address this kind of silo issues, culture, compensation, those kinds of issues, and kind of get going?
Yeah, I think there's probably no one secret sauce, but there's probably a collection of things. And if I just share at a high level, some of the things are really basic and fundamental to every business that's trying to start up, which is anchoring on the customer pain point, trying to work out what's the business model or the path to scale, and how do we build it. I think what's probably unique about the corporate context is if you think about a board or a venture board for a startup within a company, there's really two functions, two really important functions. One is to create the environment that allows this company to succeed and run relatively independently of the governance that's imposed by the mothership. At the same time, the other thing that it has to do is it has to unlock the assets of the corporation, which is extraordinarily hard. And so reaching back into the big parent company to say, hey, maybe you have an advantage in the context of access to customers or distribution, or maybe the brand, and unlocking those assets to allow this corporate startup to succeed. Because let's face it, the reality is there's a lot of smart, hungry people out there that are pushing their companies and driving innovation. And if you ask a team that's working in the context of a big company bureaucracy to try to compete, and then you saddle them with the bureaucracy of the big company, to your point, TM, it just gets harder. And you're adding this, and it's harder without a clear advantage. And when you bring that advantage, actually, what's tremendous about corporate venturing is, I think every startup would die to have access to the assets that many companies would bring. And if you can combine the two, the access to the assets with startup ways of working, with the right talent and capabilities, with the right governance, there's an opportunity to hit basically and leverage off a big platform and make a relatively strong success, because you have the opportunity to move a lot faster initially as you start to scale. So, I think there's a collection of things that come together, but ultimately we do think that there's a path, and we've seen, several examples that have sprouted up, and certainly some examples that we've been a part of to demonstrate that this pathway can be one that's very interesting.
Dato Sri Shazalli, there are some leaders who have sort of that foresight and are forward-leaning, and you have had an amazing track record at Celcom, at TM, Telecom Malaysia, and now you're taking the helm at Boustead. How do you take this huge corporation, in your case Boustead, so many different businesses, and have kind of meaningful impact at scale in a large corporation?
Thank you, Ravi. And I think in many ways, when you are taking your journey of leading organization across phases of time, obviously the tools that are made available for you are ever changing. If you recall, if I recall back the time when I took the helm at Celcom, the terminology of transformation is obviously key to turn around a company that at that point in time was deemed laggard. But embracing technology at that point is obviously very much different, because every parts of the technology that surrounds you are accelerating faster than your own business planning. And I think that are things that leaders have to gamble with. You follow a path of a formula that has been laid down in front of you, or be slightly more adventurous and take it in a form of a bit more maverick in that sense, to take it on in a different path. Sometimes in the form of survival as well, because you need to stay relevant. Because when I recall when the days when I started turning around Celcom, you don't hear of Facebook, Twitter, or even Instagram. Those doesn't exist, and then you move on the next year, something else thing, and you suddenly realize that your business are irrelevant anymore. the glory of SMS over WhatsApp, for example. You know, it takes over the domain of your critical business. So I think leaders has to just be able to identify the tools that are surrounding you at any point in time. And I took that opportunity through continuous learning. I think the one probably good advice that I would give any leaders now is learn. You know, don't stop at a phase where you are most comfortable with. I think I learned a lot from the startups now. You know, I got a good 2 years as well, you know, learning with them, studying and understanding them. That's why I like the idea of the speed of the startup, but rather but maintaining the wisdom of the brick and mortar, especially in business fundamentals. When you have the combination of both, you have this capability to say, should I transform or should I reinvent? You know, there are terminologies created by many. And of course, one fundamental premise that holds all the division of our business literally is our customer. You know, that sits quite commonly across whichever time frame that you are in. If you are clear about the consumers that you want to be dealing with, you know, understanding them and then the insights of, and then you accelerate everything else surrounds that. You know, you get knowledge faster through AI. You know, you need to grow information beyond before. There's no such thing as a decision made for tomorrow. Everything was yesterday, and it's possible to make a decision again yesterday. You know, it's not something different than before. And then you have to create the ecosystem and collaboration to co-create. I mean, we use that term a lot because there's no way you can accelerate individually by doing it or reinventing it or inventing it inside. You know, there's this do-it-yourself syndrome will probably be something of the past. There's no such element of that anymore. In fact, in some cases, I dropped the terminology of vendor development. You know, it's more like partners ecosystem, collaborative partners and the like. So once you have that, you have to one more ingredient that really is that make or break this whole element is the talent. You know, nurturing the talent that supports those ecosystem. If you go through the traditional brick and mortar, the infamous organization chart, you know, you are ready to fail. I think that structure is built for the purpose of creating a confinement of authorities and limit of thinking and reimagination that would stop you from progressing. So to find your way out, you know, in a way, I don't want to use the word, but I whistle myself, you know, like find a way on how to get everyone going without having to go through the authorities in a context. If you say without going to go through the very strict and regimented governance that has been created from the brick and mortar principle, you go through the route of talent development. And that's what I'm doing at the moment at Boustead, reinventing using all those elements that I think are probably more appropriate today than 5 years ago. It's not something that you could have used at Telecom or at Celcom before. This is something totally new. I'm learning with it as I progress. I'm seeing good result, good trending. I learned a bit from others, you know, like Studio Number 8, Store Number 8, the Walmart program. If you know, the accelerated incubator for retail, for example, was something that I look closely and studying very on a daily basis to see how they progress since they announced it in 2017. And 2021, I heard they are already looking at many other parts of their components because we have some retail operation here as well on our petrol station, for example. I look at Ford and Lyft collaboration, you know, in terms of AI-powered vehicles to see whether there's any room for heavy machineries in Malaysia in that context. So, and many other ideas of collaboration that has been announced by many. And we will see the fruits of this. I don't know whether they will be as successful as they claim, but learning from what others have done and also sharing with, you know, Peter Cho is a classic example. I think if I may share one, my experience with digital venture was way back in 2017. I think I visited, I don't know much, sorry, I don't, me and my wife went up in California. We visited Palo Alto. We went into one place called Digital Venture. We met this one young gentleman by the name of Jeff Schumacher, who was a founder of Digital Venture. that has just locked in together with BCG. We had a chat. I wanted to remobilize the way prepaid reload was being done, I think. And then we clicked, we came back. He said, give it a shot. So a co-creation, build and what do you call it? Build and transfer kind of a, brick and mortar idea then, which is still relevant. We had a firm understanding, Telcom and BCG, together with Digital Venture. And that's when Boost was born. If I may share that, Peter, I hope I don't mind sharing a bit of those one evidence of a story that was created from a co-creating venture between Peter Cho's organization and of course our organization then Telcom. Today is all a different story. It has grown much bigger than what it was first started. They've taken it, from Axiata, have taken it much higher level now. It's at millions of subscribers and has been very successful ever since. So stories like this are multitude. You have many of these stories created from so many evidences of the past. So I think to sum it all up, I think at the end of it all, powering innovation through any institution for turnaround, it takes a bit of gut, and a very understanding board members and security commissions, and then see whether you are breaking away from the fundamentals, which are regimented in many ways, but with a good taste for risk. I think you may have a handsome return after doing just that. I hope that carries in a nutshell some narration from what I'm doing before and also today.
And to the point that you made, for every Amazon, there is a Walmart. And just look at the amazing kind of transformation that Walmart has driven. The estimate is, half of this big retailers that at least here you have in the US are not going to be around in 10 years.
Yes.
And Walmart has very successfully sort of gone down that journey, really giving Amazon a lot of competition. Dr. Wong, I wanted to kind of, there's been a lot of discussion here about corporations and corporations driving kind of innovation. And there's a good reason, because corporations have scale. But there's this whole different part of the ecosystem. And many of our audience members are from startups that get funded by venture capitalists, and you have incubators, accelerators, you have private equity. And how do you see that ecosystem driving kind of growth, leveraging kind of digital technologies, digital transformation of kind of the Southeast Asian and especially the Malaysian economy?
Oh, thanks, Ravi. So Dato Shazalli has brought out a lot of points about what's needed in the ecosystem, right? And he's absolutely right. The various components in the ecosystem, and from a government or regulatory perspective, there's a need to look at how policies or efforts are actually coordinated on the front, right? You speak about entrepreneurial development. Peter spoke about how venture studios come in and work with corporates. There's also individual entrepreneurship. An ecosystem is required just to develop entrepreneurs. And you talk about deep tech, IoT, Industrial Revolution 4.0, the skill sets required for that. That's just another area which requires an ecosystem on its own, from education to having the right people onshore and stuff. So that's also another important area. Then you touch on the fundraising, the VC ecosystem and all. How do we look at grooming more local VCs, with scale? Right? We want to talk about Series B, C, D, right? How do we do that? And talent of VCs onshore, right? How do we see more of that? So we can then, create a broader pool of talent within the country. And that in turn will help our startups, our entrepreneurs, the network they bring to the table, like the Hive, and you have so many different locations. Those network are very, very important to us, right? Then there is also the investor ecosystem, and those are very important. Like with all this, the investors must come on the journey, right? So we think about what kind of structures can help de-risk to some extent. On the fund side, what is needed. On the participation side, corporate investors are key, institutional investors are key. So in each of these areas, there is a need to actually look at how we can facilitate. And it takes a coordination approach, really, to bring all this together for our ecosystem as a whole to come together.
And you know, many of the things you touched upon, you know, startups kind of need to be formed easily, kind of less regulation, if you may, in many cases. VCs also need less regulation, easier to kind of raise money. Then there's a lot of taxation issues. You know, when you have a startup of 20 people, you know, it's meaningless to talk about taxation. How do you think kind of regulatory bodies can help support this ecosystem with kind of regulations?
Well, I have to say, venture capitals in Malaysia are light touch regime from a regulatory perspective. They register with us and do some necessary reporting, but that's about it. So I won't say that I want to look at it from a regulatory standpoint. SC has two mandates. One is the development side and one's the regulatory side. Very often on the development side, we do a lot of engagements with multiple parties. Right? I remember we had a conversation with Peter as well to understand from a venture capital standpoint, venture studio standpoint, like, you know, how does it contribute to the ecosystem? So we do a lot of those things on the development side. Naturally, when it comes to facilitating the flow of capital, so from an investor standpoint, we do need to look at product structures and stuff in the name of investor protection. But very often in this space, it's very much sophisticated investors. So there is a certain amount of risk and you know, buyers beware on that front. But naturally, as we look at to open up to more investors, that there's a need to consider some aspects of investor protection. Yeah. And as far as from a regulator standpoint in developing talent, you touched on incentives. They are good, but there's need to consider the right incentives. They need to be targeted to curate the how to say, proposition that we want. For example, talent. Is there opportunities to incentivize risk-taking by certain entities or organizations? So those are things that we'll probably need to consider from a regulator's perspective. Last but not least, talent. We hear that there's a need for more talent onshore for VC players, right? And that's something we're keen to look at how we can work with industry to grow that space. Yeah.
And you know, money chases after money, and so people need to see good returns and good IRRs, and I know the government of Singapore, but also, you know, as part of the Dana Panjana program, the government of Malaysia and the finance minister have sort of pumped some money into the ecosystem, and some, you know, sometimes it's a great thing, but you know, if it's in the form of if startups become dependent on government money, that's not necessarily a good thing. It's another way of another type of welfare. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Dr. Wong, on how to stimulate kind of the VC ecosystem in the region.
Oh, you brought up a good point. I do think one key part of sort of building this ecosystem is partnership. And co-investments structures are very important in this sense. It brings together the public side and the private side and gives the private sector a skin in game in terms of developing the economy, especially the frontier areas, you know, the frontier business areas we talk about that bring the economy to the next level, right? So in that sense, the public sector will have more inherent patient capital, and the private sector is able to bring lots of things to the table, from network to capabilities, talent, and all that. And we see co-investment structures as very useful in terms of bringing the private sector in to develop startups. So it's not just giving out money, but there are parties that come together to make it more successful for startups to work. So in that C, we have the Malaysia Co-Investment Fund. It channels government money to SMEs, and it co-invests with the investors, or retail investors like you and me. right? To actually fund SMEs, right? And it works, right? So the idea is to use market-based financing structures to encourage private sectors to come in, and you let market drive the kind of businesses that will grow.
Peter, your thoughts, and I know in Singapore there's a lot of activity around external innovation entities. Your thoughts on kind of how external innovation or open innovation can collaborate with sort of internal innovation in corporations and kind of close that loop?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as we talked about at the top of the hour, I think Dato Sri also mentioned that the reality is corporate innovation is hard, and in some ways maybe even harder than doing it out on the side. And I'd say hard in different ways. And so, certainly from our perspective, we see an opportunity where it makes sense to partner together with big companies and to help unlock some of those challenges as it relates to talent, as it relates to governance, just even having the mandate from the top to be able to operate in that context. And I think you mentioned Singapore. Look, the reality is for many big companies, it's not a lack of capital, but maybe the way that they approach risk and think about corporate venturing. The idea that you would put out a bunch of money for a very uncertain outcome, it's not intuitive or easy for big companies that have not made decisions on that basis, but rather on, say, solid business plans to go and explore. And actually, the reality is, it's not really like that, but that's how it can be perceived. And so where the government can help is in de-risking that first step and saying, hey, look, like maybe we'll share a little bit of that risk up front to encourage you to try, because we're relatively sure that once you try, you'll find that this is a good and worthwhile pursuit. And actually the risk profile or the uncertainty that you had imagined is actually not as big as is planned. And oftentimes people look at entrepreneurs and they say they're risk takers. I would say, no, they're not risk takers. Of course, there's some risk taking, but I think what entrepreneurs bring is they're almost risk identifiers and risk mitigators. They identify what's the biggest question, what's the biggest problem as it relates to the customer, what's the biggest friction, what's the biggest potential challenge for us, and they burn down risk over time. And it's about sequencing and identifying risk versus taking risk. And so I think there are many misconceptions, I think, from the corporate side of the house that, I think from a government perspective, creating incentives to try and to mitigate a little bit of that perceived risk, I think has been really exciting and interesting as another partnership opportunity across the ecosystem.
Dr. Shazalli, your thoughts on sort of how a corporation can engage with sort of open innovation to drive its innovation goals? And maybe part two to that question, can the government help or get out of the way, or what role do you see?
This is live event, right? I think someone at I think the corporate, Peter hit it on the nail. It's very hard. It is. So I took a slightly different approach in many ways when in context of where if I were to do it in I call it my style. So that it's not really every leader could probably have their own way. I always feel that any change needs to be celebrated. The one thing that I noticed that the innovation are not celebrated. Innovation, especially in Malaysia. I don't think the government ever. I'm sorry about this, but I don't think the government of Malaysia even have an idea how to celebrate innovation. Every revolution comes with celebration. Even the hippies knows how to have a Woodstock. They have their flower child, they have their songs and dance, and you have John Lennon, and you have Yoko Ono. Do we have one in this moment of truth when we need to innovate for corporate organizations such as ours? Well, it seems that we don't. The art of celebrating innovation has sort of like put into the back burner because it becomes so high tech to the point that I sometimes feel that this is the revenge of the nerd. You know, the days of that engagement, yeah, as an outcome of which, you know, corporation take innovation as a very serious word. It is serious, but you know, there are serious things that also need some point of celebration, you know. And I think the reason I mentioned this is that organization that needs to go to reinvent itself, it needs to be fired up, it needs to be driven, it needs to be motivated, you know. There's a role for every creative individual in this business as well, but I think they are on the sideline at the moment. And as a result of which you see the startups, which are made of, there's a big age gap between the one group was now the people who was watching by the, oh, it's not my game anymore. So you end up not even learning how to fly a drone, you know, not, you know, by now every one of us should be able to fly one, but you know, you said that's a toy for the young. And as a result of which you're not part of the celebration. So I think that's one component that I think in context of what I want to do, I want to explain is, you have all the elements. You have the agility, you have the talent, you have the skill, you probably have the fun, you probably have, but the desire and the motivation to take it up to the next level. Every corporation needs to feel like a startup, you know, the burning desire to see things happen. So, and especially leaders and the government leaders as well, because then you won't initiate any changes. Because I think I have this problem, you know, and I had this conversation with one, you know, probably Dr. Wong's compatriot, you know, they're governing us, you know, the regulators. And he says, you know, Shaz, you should stick to the fundamentals. You know, and I suddenly turn around and says, you know, can you define the business fundamentals that rule us today? Are you saying the brick and mortar, or I have to be like the startup? You know, if I need to understand the new governance of today's business, and then I need to accelerate a new governance of the new digitization. You know, not the old governance, and that is missing. Really, the activating, the accelerating, and then without those governance that support this particular motion, it will be in absence, and hence there's no celebration. So I think I hope that answered number one and number two in some ways, without being too critical about of anything. And I think the one final point that I need to do for most corporations, I think we need to reintroduce, should be a reinduction of all CFOs in the countries. You know, all group finance officers need to go back to somewhere and need to be reinducted. You know, every way of measuring, you know, every way of looking at things are no longer in the same dynamic that it was before. You know, of course, you have all the ratios, and you know, you can measure every single thing. But a good CFO could kill one passion, you know, by just not allowing a simple budget to celebrate an innovation, for example. I know I'm being sarcastic there, but that's literally what it is. So I think the new fire in commercial directors need to be in synergy with what we are addressing. So the new CFOs, it's not just new CMOs, not new CTOs, but the new CFOs, the future CFOs have to be, you know, like any other future startups to be as well. So that triggers another controversial point. But anyway, by the way, Peter Choi, your background is so beautiful.
Thank you. At least something in my square is beautiful.
I have my printer at the back. Figure out how to do that, actually.
Dato Sri, there are two questions here that are very similar. They're addressed to you and maybe to the whole panel, but relate to you, which is, I'll just read part of one. Not every corporation has a CEO as forward thinking as Dato Sri Shazalli. And so there are kind of two sub questions here. One is around kind of leadership and what one of the questioner terms as old school board of directors whose resistance is imminent. And the second is there a way in which the government can encourage sort of leaders like your compatriots to take the kind of risk that you are taking? And so just maybe this question is around kind of just the role of kind of corporate leadership in driving innovation.
I'll let Dr. Wong answer on the board member.
You don't want to go there.
No, because I can see their names. Some of my board members are watching me, so but I think leaders, I think in a true sense of what is our own failure, you know, because one of the key element of any evolution of industry or corporation is succession planning and building leadership talent, you know, and we train leaders, and we have to train leaders the way you want them to be. You know, we should not be training leaders the way we used to train them in that sense. So senior leadership team, you know, have to be identified immediately upon your first day at work. It's not about identifying what you want to do, how you want to do, where you want to go, but I think one of the key areas of leadership is to, you know, one typical thing that I noticed in many situations, when one CEO gets into a new place, you know, you have two choices: bring your old team or develop what you have in hand within what surrounds you at that point in time. I believe in the later one. You know, whoever that's given on that are good leaders if they are trained to be good leaders. They can be, and they are there to be one. So I think once you have start building the so-called, you know, culture of building leaders, and then you have to accelerate this. You cannot be doing it over a 5-year period. No, put someone at 23-year-old and make him in charge. Turn it around. I can't do it through the organization chart. I do it through the initiatives. You know, you have talent programs and give them a big task to do, and then I have about, to date, I think I have about 55 initiatives that are driven by the talent pool, not by the organization business plan. It runs parallel, supported by a very strong ecosystem of partners and collaborators from the outside with, you know, very different commercial arrangement. Some are, you know, some are funded internally, some are funded externally, you know, depending on how each individual initiatives that are built. And then we go. And then we have the Jedi Council. I call the Jedi Council because it's sort of like a mirror to the board. You know, it is a Malay word that I coined. It's called Jemaah Digital. So it means the congregation of digital leaders. So I put them in parallel to the board, and all this digital idea gets in that room first before it gets to the board. And I think the board is like, you know, in a way, I can't remember. There's a song by Michael Jackson. You know, you by standing by the wall, you need to be part of the party. That's why I need to celebrate so that the board members can join in. You know, they are very distant. They are like people who are not being invited to gatherings. You know, they sit in the room, waited, and then once in a while you walk in and you tell them what's going on. You know, it's, you know, the good old tradition. The Americans call it the mushroom treatment. Keep them in the dark and feed them shit. You know, and it's that literally that's what we do to the board members. So at the end of the day, they are disjointed, away from the happening. So for some reason, we need to have that fixed. And traditionally as well, I know, Dr. Wong, I'm you know, traditionally as well, you have to be above 60 to get to be a board member. You know, that's another not that it's a rule, but it becomes a tradition, a norm in Malaysia, if not, you know. But you know, I have not had a board member that is a 31-year-old or a 22-year-old startup yet. You know, that gives you the fire in the boardroom to say, hey, you no longer, you know, I have this video on YouTube that shows a very young genius 10-year-old boy sitting in a school of 20-something graduates. And it's a bit awkward, yes, but that's what it is, and that's what it's going to be for the future as well. So I hope that's something that I covered on the two questions that has been asked. Thank you.
Thank you. And so just following up on the talent, and there's a question here also from our good friend John. And Peter, maybe I'll point it to you. So John asks kind of, how do you appropriately sort of incentivize and compensate digital talent? And if you take kind of the premise that digital technologies are transforming every industry, and so the future of cars, the future of oil and gas, the future of whatever is digital. How does the region sort of nurture, cultivate, compensate this talent, so that this talent is not looking to come to the US or China to go and get adequately kind of appreciated?
You're asking a question which is the holy grail. If I knew the answer to that, then maybe I'd be doing something different. Certainly, it's a big challenge, and it's a big challenge because the talent that's needed, exactly as you say, if you frame it in the context of, what is the need? 5 years ago at Davos, at the World Economic Forum, all the conversation was about how the technology companies were changing the world. The Googles, Facebook, Amazons, Ali's, Tencents. Like now the conversation is about how every company is a technology company. And every company has to undergo that transformation. And in the context of digital transformation of the core business, that's yet again different than setting up a corporate venture, which is again different than having a startup. And what's really interesting is that for each of those different segments of employees, it almost requires kind of a differentiated approach, which makes it hard to answer the question. For example, in startups, companies or employees have always been incentivized partly by the day-to-day compensation they get, but also in part by equity that they get to participate in. In big companies, it hasn't always been the norm, but in corporate venturing, we're seeing increasingly companies carving out ESOPs for these separate legal entities which are set up underneath corporations. Sometimes if it's not an ESOP, a stock option plan, maybe it's a long-term incentive plan. So based on achievement of specific milestones or KPIs or growth of the business, then they get some sort of a cash bump or a cash top up at the end of a period of time. But it certainly requires, from a compensation standpoint, to be really flexible and creative. And just hanging on to it hasn't been done that way, it can't be done that way because of XYZ rules, basically means that you're not going to get these folks because these folks are in such high demand. And to put it this way, recently we did a market scan. We were trying to look for product managers. And we identified in a particular market, there was something like 7,000 people that had the title product manager. But then when we actually looked really hard into it, a lot of them are process coordinators or project managers, not product managers. Somebody who can take a big complex build, break it down into discrete buildable parts, work with engineers, work with designers, work with strategic designers to actually define the product that's going to be built and deliver an MVP. That's how we think about product managers. And of the 7,000, there were 172. And so, there is a talent shortage and there's a great opportunity. And it's great, I think, frankly, in the context of, nation building, in the context of building up people and capabilities and an ecosystem. I don't mind having this shortage because it means that we need to also be creative about how do we grow these talents. It can't just be that we all compete and pay top dollar. That's not sustainable. And so what are the things that we're putting in place? What types of experiences are we creating for people to get exposures, to be able to learn how to actually be and necessary and worthwhile. So, I think it's a great time. It's a great time for many people to participate, and it's very exciting for everyone in that context.
It's a great time to be John.
Yeah.
Dr. Wong, and maybe to the panel, but maybe first to you. There is a great kind of example in front of us, which is China. And just how China has evolved in literally a decade. Of so many And so what do you think are sort of some of the lessons to be learned there to replicate in other regions?
Oh, wow. There's many factors getting going for them. So in my response earlier, I did mention about the entrepreneurship. I think that's something Malaysia can hone in better. How we as entrepreneurs then look at presenting ourselves, presenting the case, bringing out the insights of what they can do. Those are very important factors I think we can learn. Thing about China, it's they're very coordinated as well when it comes to the policies, right? You see the different parties coordinate their efforts towards common goal, right? Like they have designated at the highest level that these are the few sectors we want to develop, right? And you see every other machinery in China sort of coming together to sort of grow their ecosystem in the following areas. And to a large extent, I know Singapore does do that too, right? And that's great. That brings back to the point that I mentioned earlier about how as a government agencies, as corporates, as institutional investors and all, we need to look at how we can actually channel resources towards the key focus areas of Malaysia as an economy. Right? And that I feel is a very important component of driving this forward. Yeah.
And Dato Sri, is definitely the Silicon Valley kind of model is quite different from the China model, but they've both produced some incredible results. Any thoughts that you have there?
I have if you bring China into the forefront, I mean, I've dealt with many, let's call it the new Chinese companies. But I think the root of all these companies that I've dealt with, and even until today, I think I can name them all. I mean, all the telcos, you remember, the Huawei's of the world, the ZTE, the Fiber Homes, or Wuhan Technologies. And then today I deal with Chinese shipbuilding, Sino-Hydro, Sinovac, you know, we are doing the coronavirus vaccine as well. All these organizations are centrally from the government. They are government-linked companies. You know, the China Power is behind Sino-Hydro and many other solar new energy companies in China. Even the drone companies, the like of EHang and many others, are also originated from, or still is a fundamental part of the government. So, but for some good reasons, you know, the ability to scale out, I recall Huawei started in 1983, the same year Celcom was born, you know, and they had the same number of employees, and then Celcom is what it is today, but Huawei is a global phenomenon. So you know the drive of China in the context of, from that perspective of building government-linked based companies to become free enterprise across the world is something that I think we could emulate rather than confining our GLCs to be the same way it was since 1957. I don't know. You know, it looks like it. I mean, and then of course, Silicon Valley draws this idea of entrepreneurs, young talent who are really driven to see changes, to make new waves in the economy, or even in any part of our dimension of our social life being. And they grew literally organically and try to scale and find ways to do that. And corporation like ours as well have that sense of responsibility as well, you know, entrepreneurial responsibility, less of corporate responsibility, because otherwise you are driven very much by strict rules and governance that has been established for many years. I've been to branch out into something new. You have to take a bit of a, take a bit of a gut. So going to Silicon Valley, you see those things. You see them. You see those. You see the Peter Chos of the world. Really, they are all over. They're with backpacks behind, and highly likely they are the revenge of the net as well. So you got one. I'm showing one there, and I think embedding the two is something that Malaysia, at least our country, could do. But I think. A good final point that I want to make on this too is an example on how we treat entrepreneurs in startup versus how we treat vendors. We have always been, every organization have this vendors development program. You develop vendors and you have the supplier principal mentality. You know, there's no relationship between any one of those in terms of an equal partnership. You know, we need to break that barrier quickly. As a nation, I think we shouldn't be subordinated to any corporation, but rather create value together. I've seen relationships between suppliers and, you know, are not, the term suppliers probably is I wouldn't want to hear it anymore, but it's still being used, you know, and then vendors at the end behave like vendors. They just sit and hope to get contracts and then perform contracts without any idea of how to create value beyond that. So I think the new startups are not vendors. You know, they are in many cases solution providers that are great for organizations such as ours. And that is coming from the entrepreneurial side of where Silicon Valley was created. You know, the idea of we solve some of the essence of what you need to be solved, and then and don't treat me like any one of your vendors. But over time, I think Malaysia will learn, but a bit slow. I think we need to learn fast and very fast. I think we have to get out of this political domain and then political areas of politically driven. Rather, we should be innovation driven. So I think, I don't know. I hope I didn't cross the line there.
I think the region has an incredible kind of opportunity. The population is young. You know, they were born with a lot of them with phones in their hand. I don't know if you can see my phone. And you know, the scale, you know, collectively the region, if you include Indonesia also, you know, provides the kind of scale you see in China, India, and Brazil, and so forth. I think there's really a great opportunity. So I know we've run over our time. So I want to thank our incredible panelists, Peter Cho, Dr. Wong, and Dato Sri for this great conversation. We could continue for another hour, but we'll be respectful of your time. Matty, I want to hand it back to you.
Thank you all so much. I had an amazing time learning from you guys, and I loved how you guys talked all about culture and talent and so many of the different pain points, and how excited you guys got me, and I'm sure everyone else in the audience, about all these opportunities that are on the horizon. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you to all the attendees for joining and for your great questions. We hope to see you guys in the future at our future events, and thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.